All right, everybody. Pat Leonard here from the New York Daily News and the Talkin Ball with Pat Leonard podcast here on the Believe Network and on the YouTube channel. PL on NFL is the handle. Rate, review, and subscribe. Hit those like buttons while we are live. Remember, if you want your comment or question answered first, pay or for a super chat or a super sticker, and it will be elevated to the top of the queue. This is our Giants and NFL free agency preview lunchtime live edition here on March 7th, 2025. Last week, we kind of got lucky in getting the news to move for us. So during our live was when the Rams and Matthew Stafford agreed that he would come back to Los Angeles and the Giants had to pivot on to plan B. So, hey, maybe we'll make this all move forward. Maybe we'll spur some more action, have some more to talk about live here as you and I are batting around the best ideas for the Giants to proceed, whether it's at quarterback, corner, offensive line, defensive tackle, wide receiver, whatever the case may be. We'll talk about my recent interview with Darius Slayton, Benny Fowler, and I talking to the free agent Giants wide receiver on Talkin Ball. You can find that on the YouTube channel and also on the Believe Network audio, whether it's Apple, Spotify, etc. I am here to, of course, talk to you guys about Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson. Will the Giants trade up in the NFL draft? Where do things stand with Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, Jackson Dart? We'll tell you everything we're hearing, as much as we know right now. And honestly, as always, I want to hear as much from you as I know you want to hear from me, because I say this every live chat, but it's absolutely an honest feeling about how these community conversations go, is that I feel like the strength of Talkin Ball and Talkin Ball Live and these live chats is that we have a lot of thoughtful and passionate Giants and NFL fans who really can generate a lot of ideas, whether it's hypothetical or based on information that I'm reporting here or reports that are coming out simultaneous to these convos. It's a really good way, I think, to brainstorm, but also to point the needle and the arrow forward for where the Giants need to go, because it's never been more important, really, to figure out a new way, to figure out a new path for this organization that, as Joe Shane said and promised, has been swinging, quote unquote, for the fences when it comes to the quarterback position, where they are desperate for a solution both in the short and long term. And so what that breeds, though, is a lot of uncertainty, a lot of options, and a lot of different tangents and directions that this all can go. So I want to break down those details for you, whether it's the money, whether it's the fit on the team. We could talk about Bobby Okereke as well, based on my reports in the Daily News and my read of the entire quarterback market. Before I get into our questions and talking, about our sponsors, who I'm very grateful for, the reason why we can do Talkin Ball Live. One name I'm interested in, and this is not necessarily for the Giants specifically as much as league-wide, but the Giants could apply to this. One name I'm interested in that I haven't heard come about in recent days, but I'm curious if he will pop up, is Kyler Murray of the Arizona Cardinals. Now, the Cardinals general manager and head coach have spoken about how he's their quarterback, he's still their franchise QB, and have stood behind him as Arizona moves into 2025. But that's definitely a player that, as like I saw Diana Rossini from The Athletic report this morning, that the Las Vegas Raiders are pursuing all options on the veteran quarterback market, both free agent and trade. Now, this is something we knew because they were already pursuing the Matthew Stafford trade and competing with the Giants on that, even though he ended up going back to the Rams. But with Stafford off the market, the fact that the Raiders are in the trade market brings up some new names, right? Who would you be thinking of that would be available for trade and would be a starting caliber quarterback that Tom Brady's Las Vegas Raiders would be excited to have in the building to start in week one? Now, Geno Smith in Seattle is a player who, if he is on the Seahawks this year, I do expect Seattle to still be in the youth draft quarterback market, trying to add a young developmental QB at the position, whether Geno is there or not. So Geno's a name who you've seen people toss around. But I would throw Kyler Murray into the mix of, I guess the best way I could describe it is, you don't hear about Arizona calling anybody saying we're shopping Kyler Murray because they're not doing that. But I wonder, like, if the Giants really are, kicking every tire, and if teams like the Raiders really are turning over every stone, I wonder what a conversation would go like if the Giants or the Raiders or one of these other quarterback needy teams, obviously other teams that need QBs include the Titans, the Browns, the Jets, right? You could just throw them all into the mix. But Kyler Murray interests me. Now, am I sitting here telling you that Kyler Murray to the Giants would be the solution that turned them around and would be the optimal path to 2025 and beyond? No, I'm not. I'm not sitting here saying that. Obviously, you'd have to expend assets. You're taking on a few extra years on that contract. It is an established player, though, a guy with mobility, somebody who has proven that it can go both ways, right? It's kind of highs and lows with Murray as far as putting games on his back, and especially when he's healthy, being extremely dangerous. Not to mention, if you just pair him with Brian Dable, Dable asked a lot of his quarterback. And so that offense, when you speak about best fits for quarterbacks and for players, I think the Giants now, let's be clear, the Giants always like to prioritize, and their system, their scouting system has always graded and valued size at the quarterback position in a significant way. Joe Schoen, of course, has brought his own spin to the way they're doing things here, has his own process as well. So there's a lot of voices in there, but Joe Schoen's being a new one in the last few years. You can't sit here and say we would definitely rule a player like that out. Now, I do know that a couple years ago, Bryce Young for the Giants was viewed as a player who was, too slight, right? It wasn't just height. It was also slight in physical makeup. Can he take the beating that a quarterback would? Right? That was definitely one element of that evaluation of a player that the Giants weren't going to have, be able to select anyway. But so that is a size factor at a position where it does matter, right? Guys like Russell Wilson, Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray have had success in the NFL as undersized QBs, but there often does, no pun intended, appear to be a ceiling on QBs who are undersized. Of course, Brock Purdy, not the smallest guy in the world, but not the biggest guy in the world, but has still had success in San Francisco. Now you have some contract discussions and some debate about what will happen there being batted around. Anyway, bottom line is I bring this to your attention right off the bat to say, I'm not reporting that, the Giants are chasing Kyler Murray or that the Raiders are chasing Kyler Murray or anything of the sort. I'm just saying, being around the NFL and talking to people, I'm just curious what the phone call would sound like if a team called the Cardinals and said, we are interested, what would it take? And usually those types of conversations do happen in an offseason like this when there isn't an obvious solution available at the position. And let's face it, Matthew Stafford was the Giants' plan A. And I told you at the time, I didn't see it as like if you said Joe Schoen was showing self-interest and doing it for self-preservation's sake, I felt like going after Matthew Stafford was self-preservation and the Giants' best options aligning. I understood why they were doing it, and pairing him maybe with a young QB that you got in the second or third and going on that way to have a more competitive team now and also move on for the future, have him help you mentor a young guy. All of those things made a lot of sense to me. Devoid of Stafford, though, you kick every tire, right? And let's face it, and I'll get into this with your questions, so we'll get into all your questions, but let's face it, is the Giants, and again, we're talking a lot of Giants here, but the Raiders and these other quarterback needy teams fall into these categories. Like I said, Titans, Browns, etc. Right now, we're in the kind of offseason where with Stafford as a trade possibility off the board, now you really just have to exhaust every option. And unfortunately, the Giants are in a position where they're desperately doing so. Like I said at the beginning of this conversation, this is I would say an informed hypothetical thought exercise on Kyler. Let's call it that. I would say that if I were the Giants and if I were any NFL team, despite the Cardinals sitting there publicly saying, this is our quarterback, there's been ups and downs of Kyler's career there. That's a team that, could you see them conceivably benefiting from getting out from a big contract at the quarterback position and kind of retooling there? So I'm just saying I would make the call. I don't know how the conversation would end, but do I think that the phone would hang up immediately? I don't know. I think it'd be worth making the call. That's just my, like I said, hypothetical informed speculation on if you're an NFL team right now needing a quarterback, call the Cardinals, see what's up. But that said, Aaron Rodgers is obviously the big name that we are going to talk about today, as well as the NFL draft names. And we'll get into all the details of the quarterbacks. This is brought to you here, obviously. If you're a returning loyal follower, listener, viewer, we are brought to you here on Talkin Ball live with Pat Leonard on the Believe Network and on the PL on NFL YouTube channel by MyBookie Sportsbook. Thing about MyBookie is they just have a prop for everything. Right now, like I'm watching Lakers Knicks last night. You can play that game a 1,000 different ways on MyBookie. And with March Madness coming up, after the NFL season we just had together and the way we made money together on those props on my Pat's picks, sprinkle it a little bit on those props, you're just not going to find a better menu of offerings than MyBookie. So you can use Bitcoin, you can throw down your Visa credit card, whatever the case is, you're going to be able to deposit and win creatively. And I'm telling you, you can bet on the number one pick right now in the NFL draft, who that's going to be. Although obviously the odds have been pushing further and further towards Cam Ward. But between that, March Madness, the Masters coming up, here's how you're going to do it. You're going to use my promo code Pat's Picks, and you make that first deposit, you're going to get a 50% match on that first deposit all the way up to $2,000. So if you make a $2,000 deposit with the Pat's Picks code at MyBookie right now, you will get an extra $1,000 free to spend on MyBookie's site. So you're going to want to win big, obviously. If you're placing bets on sports, you're going to want to bet and play with MyBookie. Also brought to you, obviously, over my shoulder here, by Boom Chaga Mushroom Super Drink, natural extract loaded with anti-inflammatory, immune-boosting antioxidants and heart-healthy compounds. You can easily pour this natural liquid supplement into any of your favorite drinks. I put mine in my coffee every morning and immediately feel the difference. I personally feel a post-workout-like energy boost with Boom. Chaga also has the ability to lower cholesterol, reduce inflammation, and improve immune and heart health with its beta-glucans and antioxidants. Go to boomchaga.com today and use that code. You see it on the screen right here, Talkin Ball 25, or access it through the QR code that you see on your screen right now, and you'll get 25% off your first order on the subscribe and save option. Start feeling the difference today at boomchaga.com. And just so you know, not only do I put it in my coffee in the morning, but on a day like yesterday where I had some lunch and I felt a little bit sluggish, after that kind of that post-coffee downturn, have a little bit of food in your belly, I actually had some Boom Chaga there, and it kind of gave me a second wind for the rest of the day. So a lot of different benefits of Boom Chaga. So go try it now. Hugely popular at the Super Bowl, New Orleans Radio Row. Honestly, was completely blown away by people's reactions at the Super Bowl. And of course, brought to you by Sal Loretta for Men, luxury menswear and tailoring in Bergen County, New Jersey. Go to Sal Loretta's. Tell them Pat sent you in Midland Park. And also brought to you by Estate 98 Coffee. Natural specialty coffee concentrate makes a hot 10-second iced, or it makes delicious coffee and only takes 10 seconds. It could be hot. It could be iced. It's awesome. Also, great mixer for espresso martinis. Estate98.com/talkinball for a special 80% off offer. Go get it. Go get it. And if I have a trivia question today by the end of the chat, we'll do our Estate 98 trivia question, try to get somebody a free bottle of Estate 98 today, but we'll see what we have coming down the pike. All right. George Lewis, what's up? George says, what's up, Pat? What are the updates? God bless. Good to see you. Jacob says, what's up? Smack that like and sub button for Pat on your way in. Appreciate that, Jacob. Jacob says, anything new on the Giants and free agency? Jackson Dart and the Giants. Let's see. Jackson Dart. Let's talk about Jackson Dart. So here's what I would say about Jackson. Best I can tell is because let's say this, the Shedeur Sanders sliding noise, right? One thing, when you're in this business long enough, you become cynical, but in a way that it's like, I've seen this before, right? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me type thing. So when you hear, oh, this young man's meetings with certain teams aren't going well, and you start to hear negativity around a prospect and, oh, maybe he's sliding. One of the first thing that comes to my mind, the longer I've been doing this, is who wants Shedeur Sanders to fall to their pick? You know, you have to be aware that these games do get played at this time of year. The best I can tell, though, is that there's not some ruse going on about Shedeur Sanders trying to slide to some team, and this is not a phony thing. Like the idea that Shedeur Sanders might have slid in that Jackson Dart in the end could be QB2 is not crazy. It is something that some people in the league legitimately believe. Now, that also, remember, can be team to team. So out of 32 teams, you could have 20 teams who have changed their mind and said Jackson Dart is now their QB2. You could have a couple that have fallen in love with Jalen Milroe, and then you could have the rest who are still Team Shedeur. You could have somebody who still has Shedeur number one because they love him as a fit and they got along with him well, and there's a connection there, right? So none of this is like black and white statements about the quarterback and how the draft is going to shake out definitively come down the pike, right? So I learned from my guest Adam Schefter, who was always qualifying. This is my opinion at 1:27 p.m. on March 7th, but by 1:30 it could be different, right? That's how this goes. But the Jackson Dart as potential QB2, some teams just loving him overall as their favorite all around prospect. Like those are real conversations happening. How high does he end up going in the draft? Don't know that yet. But anybody in the quarterback market, I would say, how high they're picking right now, don't take Jackson Dart out of the conversation immediately. It's interesting because I think I began the combine week saying to myself, Jackson Dart would make a lot of sense for a team in the early second or late first. That could still be the case, right? That could still become the case. But, like a team like the Seahawks I mentioned in the teens, and as you get further down the board, the quarterback is a premium position. And last year, out of those 5 guys who went so high in the NFL draft, it was a lot of people were saying they thought in the end it was going to be 3 to 4, but even some people were doubting that it was going to be 4 going that high, and it ended up being those top 5 or 6 actually. And so there was a lot of doubt about whether it was going to be more than 3, maybe 4 at the max, and it ended up being 6. There's such a premium at this position. As I was going back and looking through at the pursuit of quarterbacks when it comes to the NFL draft and teams trading up, there are examples of teams, trading up and missing and kind of, if not regretting, then ruining how much they actually gave up to make that charge. But when you look at these recent years, where last year, at the top 3, 1 through 3, and then not long after, you see Penix come off the board, McCarthy, Bo Nix, and people jockeying for position. And the year before that, it was Young and Stroud 1, 2. And then Anthony Richardson, all this debate about how much will potential really matter when it comes to the draft spot. The guy goes 4 overall, a trade up for Trey Lance 2 years before that in 2021 at number 2 behind Trevor Lawrence and Zach Wilson before another trade with the Bears to go get Justin Fields, and on we go. So, I think what we've learned over the course of these last several years, the last decade, really, in the NFL draft, you're going to go back to the Jared Goff and Carson Wentz trades by the Rams and Eagles, charging up to 1 and 2 years ago. This is just a position where if a player like Dart, if a prospect like Dart is moving the needle, and the quarterback too in Shador is creating more questions for himself and teams than answers, it is not crazy to throw players like that, kind of into the mix, I would say. Michael, what's going on? He says, what are your thoughts on the Giants trading up to pick number 1? Do you think the Titans will stick and pick Ward there and not listen to the Giants and or Browns offers? Let me start, Michael, by saying this. I have, ever since January when the Titans hired Mike Borgonzi, and I watched and listened to every word of their introductory press conference, the Titans sounded like a team who wants to trade out of the top pick. Now, they might have just been being smart about, listen, we still have a lot of work to do on these prospects. And right now we're going to invite as much action as we can on that draft pick. And if we don't end up taking it, fine, so be it. And, you can't hate that type of business, right? But to me, the noise persisted at the NFL Combine that a majority of people in the NFL expected the Titans to trade out. Now, this becomes tricky because the Titans are still doing the work on the players, right? The visits are happening as we speak of these top prospects. And obviously, if a team that needs a quarterback as desperately as the Titans is trading out of that number 1 pick, that reflects that a team that needs a QB just as desperately as the Giants do is looking at this quarterback class and saying, nah, we'll pass. Or, we'll take one, but we're not married to anyone. We kind of see these guys as a group of players who will work with one of them when we get them, whether it's in the trade down or whether it's in the second round. Now, listen, that doesn't mean that if they were to trade out, like if the Giants love Cam Ward and they want to trade up to 1 to get him, and the Titans don't have as high of an opinion of Cam Ward, that doesn't mean Ward is not going to succeed, right? It's not like the Titans are the arbiters and the final decision makers of who's a good quarterback and not in that equation. But, I do think it would be telling for them to be saying, we'll pick at 1 if we see a generational player, and them trading out when they have such a desperate need at QB. If there were a player here that instilled confidence in an organization, even a little bit on the franchise QB long-term stability element, that would easily be the pick there. So I think that's something to consider. I do think, though, that the Giants are in a position where they have to keep swinging, as Joe Shane said, and they need to go big at QB in this sense. They need to win games early, and they need to win more games in general, and that both applies to this season. But they also need to be able to point at something in their organizational structure that points to the future simultaneously. And from the jump, the Giants have always seemed like their plan here was to acquire or add or sign a veteran and draft a quarterback. The question became, though, would they draft one up high, A, depending on what they feel about the draft class, and B, where they attack in free agency. Now, there is no question in my mind that Joe Shane, who is, I've said this many times, say it again. When Joe Shane speaks to us at the Combine and when he does these press conferences, typically what he shares about his plans, about his preferences he's telling you exactly what is on his mind and how he feels. Now, obviously, that's gotten him in trouble in a lot of these negotiations and certain times and what he said and what's been picked up on camera. But largely, Joe kind of wears on his sleeve how he feels or what he's projecting, at least, right? Based on all the research and data and the work they're doing behind the scenes. And he came across at the combine before the week as lukewarm on the class. Like he basically said, we're still studying to see whether that quarterback you're talking about is in this class. And if he is, is it only one? Do we feel like there's a couple? But that also marries with the way the league is treating the quarterback position in this draft right now. It seems like there is not a ton of hype and race for like an obvious top guy. Now, that said, people's opinions do point to Ward in large part as the guy and probably the obvious number one pick in the draft, just depending on who decides he's their guy, he's their preference. To answer your question, Michael, the Titans very much are in the business of entertaining, offers to that. I mean, they've essentially put up a billboard inviting phone calls, having those conversations. Joe Schoen vowed he would have every one of these conversations, just like he did last year. Here's the other thing, and I think this is important to remember, and this is, again, in fairness to Joe and the Giants, like when Joe said we're going to take big swings, I believe in taking big swings, there were people saying, what swings are you talking about? You haven't drafted a quarterback. And that's fair, right? That's a fair criticism and comeback. But Joe Schoen did trade up or tried to trade up last year for Drake May at number 3. Don't forget that he offered a huge package of picks to the New England Patriots to try to move up from 6 to 3 to take Drake May. And what ended up happening was the Patriots just wouldn't budge and they took the QB. But Shane and Daboll like Jaden Daniels. They like Drake May. And in the end, and we reported this last year, but in the end, Shane actually included pick number 6 last year. So that was moving from 6 to 3. Number 47 in the second round last year. And this year's first rounder in an offer to the Patriots last year. And New England said no. So all of that, Michael, is to say anybody who is doubting that the Giants would make an expensive trade up. I mean, they already put it on paper, right? Essentially, they showed you already they would try to do that and really not skimp on the price to do it. It just got to a point where it was like, here's how far we're going. We feel like we're offering a lot. And New England decided they like the player more instead. Now, even though they're only going from 3 to 1, there's a premium on making that pick, and we'll talk more about what it could cost, but largely you could look at certain moves in the past and say, well, this team moved from 2 to 1 or 3 to 2 or 6 to 3, and here's what it cost. But moving up to the number 1 overall pick and getting the number 1 pick on the board, and then the competition you presumably have for that if the pick really is up for auction, not to mention you're going up to get a quarterback, there's going to be a premium on that. Now, do I know they're going to trade up for a QB and that's going to be the path? Here's what I think. I think that the Giants meant what they said, and Joe Schoen meant what he said when they told us we're going to go get the quarterback who helps us win the most games this year. And we also are going to judge whether somebody can help us in the draft. I think where we stand right now, the Giants at this moment here on March 7th, they need a veteran quarterback on their roster that they feel they could start conceivably in week 1 and feel confident about their ability to win the game. So that's where it starts. The draft conversations, though, are happening tangential to, simultaneous to, and they are complementing that decision and what they're figuring out there. But here's what you have to understand. The Giants this Matthew Stafford thing, obviously it amounted in the end to Stafford using this process as leverage to get a better salary and stay in LA. But this was a very real situation where the Giants were aggressively pursuing him, where it looked at certain points early on in the process of that week like it could/would happen. And then there were obviously various pivot points where you figured out, okay, now the Raiders are really a stronger contender. Now the Rams are bringing them back in the building. And then you kind of start to see it fizzle out. But, all of that is to say the Stafford not working out caused then the Giants to say, okay, we have to scrap that. And now it's a whole new plan, right? It's a whole new different plan than what they initially were looking at. But Joe Schoen did say he, Brian Daboll, and John Mara spoke about prior to the whole pursuit of Stafford or during the pursuit of Stafford, that they spoke to him about their several different options. Like if this doesn't work, then we're going to go to plan B. If this plan B doesn't work, we're going to go to C. Now, you can talk about those things, but it was still a gut punch that they didn't land Stafford. Relic checks in with a $20 super chat. Thank you so much, Relic. He says, hey, Pat, thank you for all you do getting this info for us New York fans. Your work does not go unappreciated, sir. Relic, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that. I love this community here. I love you guys, how much you contribute, how passionate you are. And also, I'm really excited about what's continuing to come down the pike here on the podcast. I mean, you saw I had a presence at the Super Bowl and Radio Row in New Orleans, and then we're doing good work, sharing stuff on social and going live immediately after Shane from the NFL Combine. Special guest, we had Darius Slayton this past week. We had Allen Robinson the week before that. Benny Fowler and I continuing to try to bring you the best insight and league-wide guests, information and insight from executives, players, agents, fellow reporters. So a lot more coming there. And that's all due to people like you, Relic, supporting us and being here and helping us out. So thank you so much. Elias, what's up? Great to see you. Elias says, hey, Pat, if the Titans require next year's first for the trade up, would Shane do it and would Mara allow it? Could be a factor if nothing gets done. That's a good question, Elias. I think, okay. Now, 1 second, coffee break. And sorry, that was free 2 seconds of advertising there for Dunkin' Donuts, but you got to pay for more. All right, so let's see. Usually it's a state 98, but we were out. So, all right, let's see. So the question about will it cost a 1? Now, if you think about trades to number 1 for a quarterback, all these other trades that have happened in recent years up to the number 1 pick have been from further out. So like the Panthers, they came up from number 9 a couple years ago to go to 1. So that cost them an extra first round pick from the next year, which obviously ended up being the number 1 overall pick. Joke was on Carolina. If you think about the Rams and the Titans in 2016, the Rams came all the way up from number 15 to number 1. So they had to include, obviously making that swap, but then going in with their 2017 first as well. Even going back, though, to 2016, the Carson Wentz trade, the Eagles up from 8 to 2. They had to include an extra first-round pick. You think about certain trades that have happened up for QBs recently that did not include a trade up for a 1. The Jets traded up for Darnold from 6 to 3 in 2018, and they gave up 3 2s, although the 2s ended up turning out to be 37, 49, and the next year's 34. So those are 3 2s, with 2 of the 2s ending up almost pretty much being like 2 late firsts. So they didn't give up a first, but they ended up giving the equivalent of 2 late firsts up, if that makes sense. Now, the Mitchell Trubisky trade with Bears and Niners in 2017, remember the Bears went up from 3-2 to take Trubisky. So the Bears moved up from 3-2 and gave San Francisco a third, a fourth, and a third the next year on top of swapping those first round picks. So there is precedent for a slight move up. That's one pick, not two, obviously, from a slight move up at the top of the board for a quarterback that did not include a first round pick, but that was in 2017, right? So you have to remember that. Also, the number one overall pick, even though it's one pick higher than the number two overall, it is worth much more than the number two when it comes to the trade value, when it comes to leverage to command additional assets. So if you think about those mid-round picks being involved in a 3-2 trade, and then you go to the Bears Panthers last year, stay with me, or in 2023, when it was from 9-1, think about they had to include an extra first. They also had to include in that high move up a premium veteran, now a salary they were getting off the books, but a premium veteran in a guy like DJ Moore, a wide receiver who now obviously his first year in Chicago with Caleb Williams did not go like how anybody wanted it to. But the point is we're talking about the trade up price. And I think if you pair together what all of these costs were in these trades up, some we talked about were from 9-1, 8-2. Some we talked about there were from 6-3, 3-2, all for quarterbacks, I might add. This is within the last decade in the NFL draft. I think it's very obvious there that you're talking about when it's Giants and Titans, especially when you consider that it could be competition with, let's say, the Cleveland Browns / New York Jets, right? If you have competition, not to mention you're going up to number one, considering the precedent we just laid out historically for what these trades have looked like, to me, you're including next year's first most likely or having to. And if you're not, and you somehow figure out a way not to, the Titans are a team who needs players and wants a boatload of picks. So it's either a young player you're probably, sending into that trade package because they're trying to get young and build. And if it's that plus the first round pick, and then you're reducing the amount of mid rounds you're getting, or if you steer clear of including next year's first, are you giving up a younger player who people wouldn't expect that you'd be trading, plus an additional, premium mid-round pick, right? I think, I could be wrong about this, I think it would be hard to accomplish that trade without giving up next year's one, especially when you consider, again, stay with me, when you consider that the Giants last year tried to move up from 6-3, the same way that the Jets moved up 6-3 with the Colts for Darnold years ago. As we talked about, the Jets at that time, that cost them swapping the firsts and giving up 3 second rounders, but the 2 second rounders functioned almost as late firsts. So then think about what Shane did last year, was offered his high second round pick in the 40s, the pick swap, plus the first the following year, which, as we know, turned out to be number 3, and the Patriots still said no. So I look at what our context is historically, and then what the Giants offered last year in a package that was turned down. That sounds to me like, today's price is today's price. Coming up to the number 1 pick instead of what would have been number 3 last year. You think about the context of what the Titans would be giving up and how Brinker and Borgonzi and Tennessee wants ample assets. Now, you could have that, you could bat around the conversation with them, and I'm sure these are all the conversations happening when you're talking about trades. You could say to Tennessee, if you're really trying to protect that pick, why don't we include an extra, we're giving you this year's 2, we're giving you next year's 2, we're giving you this year's player, we're giving you a 4th 2 years from now. What if we throw in another 3rd next year, but we protect next year's first, right? And you're thinking of ways to avoid that. Tennessee is a team who wants more kicks at the can. They want more swings at the plate. they have said out loud that they want to make 30 draft picks in these next 3 years. So are you dealing with a team and with a front office that will accept a package that includes more assets, but doesn't include next year's first? That's what you have to think about. Now, from a just flat out standpoint of what would the Giants be willing to give up? What would Joe Schoen be willing to give up? Where will that happen? Here's one thing that I think you unquestionably have to say. This is not, and I'm not saying Joe Schoen feels this way about, I'm not saying that Joe Schoen feels this way about the first round pick, but when you're a general manager who is under this type of pressure and faces this type of desperation to assemble a competitive team in the short term, if the thing getting in the way of going up and getting the quarterback you want is next year's first, you don't know if you're going to be making that pick next year. You might not have the GM job. So you're not trying to do poorly by the Giants organization. You're not trying to throw the next GM and the organization under the bus and say, screw next year's first, I'll throw it in. That's not how you're operating if you're Joe Schoen. And he has vowed that he would not be reckless with those types of decisions. But, at the same time, is he going to not consider giving up that pick? Listen, we don't know exactly what the trade package was going to be if Stafford said yes and that happened. But you have to imagine that protecting this year's first round pick in that trade offer involved giving up next year's first, or else it wouldn't have even been a conversation, right? So it's not like the Giants, if they were going to be chasing a potential trade up for a quarterback and they felt that strongly that Cam Ward or whoever they were trading up for was their guy, it would be silly not to at least include the number one pick in those conversations. I hope that all answers that question, Elias, because really the fact of the matter is Tennessee is still hosting these visits with these top prospects, and we're not privy, frankly, to what the exact trades are looking like at the moment, but these are the types of conversations that are happening. Let's see. Just checking the text messages here. One moment. All right, on to the next question. Thank you so much, Elias, for that super chat. Really appreciate you. All right, back into the queue here. Want to get to everybody. Thank you for being here for this Talkin Ball live lunchtime edition here on the Believe Network on the PL on NFL YouTube channel. Barb says this is nerve-wracking not knowing who our quarterback is and whether or not we can get our guy in the draft. I need to hear we signed a guard and a corner ASAP. Yeah, very well said, Barb. And thanks for bringing that up because, we haven't talked about some of these other positions yet, but obviously was talking to you guys last week from Indianapolis about Byron Murphy Jr. and just the cornerback market in general, the top of the quarterback market in general, as well as some lesser known names who the Giants have poked around on. Not every corner has been thrown up on the board for the Giants, at least as of late last week. It wasn't like every single corner, was on the list, but they have their evaluations, their preferences, their fits, and I would expect them to shop at the top of that market. Who knows who they land? DJ Reed has profiled since the end of the season from the draft as kind of the obvious fit, especially once they hired Marquand Manuel from the Jets, to coach the secondary. Reed makes a lot of sense. Murphy is a guy they've shown interest in. Just a question of, who do they pay? We mentioned Jair Alexander last week from the standpoint of, is that a player who is going to be required to trade for, or is he going to come free via release? So maybe a much different conversation there with Jair Alexander if he's a free agent versus if you're giving up an asset for a player like that, right? So, but corner, definitely a position. Um, Offensive guard, Barb, I totally agree. Expect them to shop there. Jordan Rodon from ESPN, I thought brought up some really good names. The one that he said to keep an eye on was Patrick McCarry from Baltimore. I think that's a smart comment by Jordan. I think you want to sign and add players from teams that play with a different kind of attitude and who are used to dominating physically their opponent in front of them, and who can be strong influences on the Giants' own players and locker room to create a better culture and to do just that once they take the field. And some of the names that Jordan threw out there, but Macari stuck out to me from Baltimore as one to keep an eye on for sure. Although I did tell you guys this as well. Jake Kubas is a player that the Giants have a pretty high opinion of, coming off his rookie season, played both left and right guard at times, played more right guard. I believe he started 2 games at right guard and started 1 at left and then played part of another at right. But, bring some nasty. And so that said, I think you can't count on, right? If you're letting Greg Van Roten go, Joe Shane articulated that he seems to have confidence in his current offensive line. It's almost one of those things like they feel like they invested last year mostly across the board in the offensive line the last few years. So they are kind of not rolling the dice, but they're gambling on their guys, their top 4 linemen being the guys and gelling and also assimilating one more piece into that, liking Kubas as well, which creates competition. I saw Jordan as well note that he expects Evan Neal to move to guard at some point this offseason. I'm interested where that's going to go because I thought it was super interesting. Joe Shane, every time he was asked about Evan Neal at the combine, kept saying a version of this phrase, like our roster is going to look pretty different in 2 weeks. So then we'll see where everything stands. Like when he mentioned what's going to happen with Evan and what's the feel going to be. And are they going to move positions or are they really not? And where's it going to go? To me, it was almost starting to sound like a player that is he going to be somewhere else, a couple of weeks from now? Is he going to be included in a trade? Like no one told me that, but it was just very murky conversations and answers to pretty straightforward questions about a guy. And obviously a topic that we've kind of talked about ad nauseum and seems obvious that they should have tried him inside already. So, does that lead them to sign a guy in free agency at right guard, but also, not break the bank and go top of market? And therefore you end up having Neal, Kubas, and, free agent signing who was, let's say, option 1C on the class competing for the right guard spot. Maybe that's the case. But yes, Barb, to your point, positions like corner and guard, ones to watch. I did mention, let's see. Savage Steve says, what's up, Pat? Hopefully you're having a great Friday. What's the word in town and what do you feel strongly about? Coming off that conversation with Darius Slayton and then watching the market, watching like a guy like Tutu Atwell with the Rams get $10 million. I think, all signs point to Darius Slayton not being a Giant anymore. I mentioned in my report after our conversation on YouTube that teams like the Steelers, the Chargers, the Carolina Panthers are among teams that I would expect to be in the Darius Slayton market. Slayton positioned very well in that free agent market. And so the Giants then would be looking for wide receiver 2. Josh Palmer from the Chargers is a name that I know they've checked in on. Would be interested to see if they go that route. Obviously, a lot of names out there, an underwhelming class at the price that the Giants would be shopping at. Interested to see where their receiver room as a whole would go. I do think also that, I'm interested to see from, Jalen Hyatt to Wan'Dale Robinson, how their usages evolve. Where do they go from here? Um, Tez Johnson from Oregon. I'll say this about no one has told me anything that about like that specific player. So this is totally me observing. But Tez Johnson, obviously very slight physically with his build, with his weigh-ins, all that, but had significant numbers in production at Oregon, a guy who could help you as a returner, help you in the slot. Now, are you going to draft a slot / gadget guy in the mid to later rounds when you already drafted a guy like Wan'Dale Robinson a few years ago in the second round? I don't know. But I know that Brian Daboll's offense really requires a higher level of production from that slot position. And I don't know if, Tez Johnson would be a guy that they would view as a solution there, whatever the case may be. But I was watching him perform on the floor and go through his NFL combine, and he just jumped out to me as the kind of player that I could see Daboll liking in his offense. Again, I'm not reporting that they're drafting Tez. I'm just saying that he's the kind of player that I could see, fitting into the way that Daboll calls an offense, the way he, runs his scheme. But again, he's not the only player in this draft class with that kind of skill set. So I'm not just limiting it to that. But when you're asking me what I feel strongly about, I'm kind of looking at the kind of setup of the offensive weapons and, looking at how does this shake out? How do they patchwork it together? Barb says Commanders release Jonathan Allen. Please, can we get something done? Jonathan Allen is the type of player who I would think at this point is, trying to sign with a winner and trying to win because he's, I'm not speaking for him. I mean, maybe he would want to be overpaid or, get a fat check to play somewhere where he doesn't have a guarantee of competing the same way. Also, there are players, who don't mind staying in division to take out their frustrations on their former team of being let go, right? Whatever, like Slayton, for example, said to me on the interview that he doesn't have like a chip on his shoulder about like, oh yeah, I can't wait to sign with the Cowboys, Eagles, and Commanders to stick it to the Giants. That's not like something he's thinking about front of mind in his free agent process. Like if it happens like that, so be it, but it's not like his goal. So you never know, like if a player feels that way or decides on that type of route, that can always be a factor. But my guess is that Jonathan Allen would receive significant interest and that he would have significant interest in playing for a better team with better outlook on 2025. Now, that said, it is attractive, of course, playing, next to a Dexter Lawrence. So worth the phone call, at least. NYC says, good stuff, Pat. Not a question, but a statement. In no way, shape, or form is a quarterback room of Rodgers, Dart, and DeVito acceptable. That is my TED Talk. Interesting to me, too. I like Tommy DeVito a lot. First of all, let me say that. Good kid or young man, and wish him the best. But his re-signing was expected, was a formality as an exclusive right free agent. But it's very interesting. Like you think about last year, he was the third quarterback on the roster all season, and then suddenly they just leapfrogged Drew Lock and started Tommy ahead of him. Like if you're a quarterback trying to come to the Giants as QB2, what's to say they wouldn't do that to you next? I mean, that's a weird part of this dynamic. Jake says, Pat, I think Howie Roseman is the only man that can save this franchise. So Jake, interesting. Barb says, Jake, there was a point in time where the Eagles fans despised Roseman. Well, that was related for sure to not taking Justin Jefferson and taking Jalen Reagor, among other things, right? Jake says, as a Giants fan, it pains me to say that Howie Roseman is the best GM he's ever witnessed. He has a Bama offense, a Georgia defense, and is great at trading nothing for big names. He plays Madden in real life. One thing the Giants do, or the Eagles do very well, is they use those void years at the end of contracts to kind of spread out the cap and find ways to fit top players in together on the roster. Another thing that was very clear this season that I think every team can learn from with the Eagles, and they're not the first team to do it, but their ability and Howie Roseman's ability to preempt the Jason Kelce and Fletcher Cox retirements. Like, he didn't wait for them to retire. He went out and attacked defensive tackle and center position before his all-pro, some of the best players on his team at both of those positions hung them up. And so the Eagles were ready this year to reload and go. And that was one point I questioned basically at the beginning of the season, especially when they were struggling early. It was hard to imagine Kelce and Fletcher Cox being replaced in that productive of a fashion by Cam Jurgens and Jalen Carter. And then obviously they had drafted Jordan Davis too. But now the Giants are in a different spot, obviously. The Eagles were a strong team that needed to reload at spots. But I do think it's instructive for every NFL franchise, Giants included, with where they are. You don't want to be in a position where it's like, here's what we lost this year, here's what we need to fill. Where, again, I like Tyler Nubin as a young man a lot, but like last year, forcing a safety pick in round 2 because you let go McKinney. Like, you don't want to be in situations where you haven't planned for that. And now we're like, pulling out the stopper and then trying to plug the hole immediately. Like, you want to be in a position of foresight and projecting productively to avoid cracks forming in the foundation as you're progressing. Jake says, also, it was Pat's birthday this past week. Everyone like and subscribe. Jake, appreciate you, man. Appreciate that love. Yeah, it was a great birthday in Indianapolis. Celebrated with friends, celebrated with family before and after. Felt like I was able to stretch it out all week. You got people saying, is today your birthday? Is tomorrow your birthday? Happy birthday. You take it all. You know what I mean? Loved it. Thank you, Jake. Thank you, Barb. Yep. Let's see. DeRealist says, Pat, love the show, brother. You got it, DeRealist. Thanks for being here. Please like, share, and subscribe, says NFL Giants. Welcome back. Let's see. Kyle says, can you talk about your Bobby Okereke report? Of course. Yes. Thank you, Kyle, for asking. See, usually I change cups to my Salaretta cup, but today I was rushing around, so can't be giving up that free screen time. Got to go get your Boom Chaga. You know what I mean? Actually, before I answer the Bobby question, let me just say, remind you guys, MyBookie, it's mybookie.ag. Pat's Picks is the promo code, and you'll get 50% match on your first deposit up to $2,000. Boom Chaga Mushroom Super Drink right here. Can't recommend the product enough. I can't tell you how many people in New Orleans at the Super Bowl were raving about this. They were trying free samples, coming back to the table. Bobby O and Kayvon actually both tried it. Kayvon seemed to approve. Hope he doesn't charge me for sharing that, but yeah, wouldn't try it on camera, which I completely respect. So Talkin Ball here will eventually get the funds up to have Kayvon be promoting on camera. That's one of our goals here. But Boom Chaga Mushroom Super Drink, natural extract loaded with anti-inflammatory, immune boosting antioxidants and heart healthy compounds. What you're going to want to do is go to boomchaga.com, use Talkin Ball 25 or the QR code, and then you'll get 25% off your first order on the subscribe and save option. So start feeling the difference at boomchaga.com. Salaretta for Men in Midland Park, New Jersey, Bergen County, luxury menswear and tailoring. Go there, tell them Pat sent you. Only the best at Salaretta. And Estate 98 Coffee. It's estate98.com/Talkin Ball. And you're going to get 80% off an order there. And Estate 98 obviously sponsors our Giants trivia questions. Although at the moment, nothing at the tip of my tongue for today's live chat, but we'll see if we'll get it going. All right, let me answer Kyle's question here. He asked about Bobby Okereke. Yes, Kyle. So there have been rumblings since January all the way through the NFL Combine that some key decision makers in the Giants building don't have a high opinion of Bobby when it comes to what his value would be in 2025 and beyond on the roster. Now, he has a $3 million roster bonus due on, I believe, the third day of the league year, which would, I'm pretty sure, my understanding is that is this coming Friday, right? So a week from today, the 14th. So does it result in the Giants releasing Bobby and gaining back a little bit of cap space? Does it result in him being a player that they include in a trade if they make one? Does it result in, just some more hard conversations internally about we need to proceed differently and here's the best way? How? All of those things I think are still options and it's unresolved. Like, where is this going? From a standpoint of if he remains a Giant, you're saying, well, it has to look different from last year because we know based on the season prior on Martindale's defense, Bobby shined. He didn't miss a snap. He had monster numbers. And this past year, you had basically not unlocked the same way as a player and as a weapon on the defense. It felt like the year before he was kind of cleaning up in the middle of that defense. It was almost like the defensive line was giving Bobby opportunities and the scheme was giving Bobby a way to attack the ball cleanly. Whereas this year, whether it was the lack of depth and personnel up front, the lack of the scheme helping him out in not the same way under Shane Bowen, a lot of different factors that go into a change in system, a change in philosophy, a change in usage, right? Changes in personnel in front of you. All of those things kind of, you throw them into the pot. Not to mention, it's important to always qualify when you're talking about something with the Giants defense. This is years upon years now, really, of Giants players and coaches on the defensive side of the ball suffering through having to basically being under pressure to be perfect because the offense can't score a single freaking point when they need one, So that's obviously a huge qualification about any conversation when it comes to the Giants defense. So let's be clear there. But all of that said, this is a very real situation where Bobby was not used or unlocked optimally last season. And there is some feeling in the Giants building about, is something else a better fit there? They obviously had a high opinion of him as a player. And I'm not sitting here telling you every person in the Giants building, like, doesn't want Bobby Okereke there, anything like that. That's not what my report is. My report is that there are some decision makers in the building. There are some key members of the Giants brass who do not have as high of an opinion as you would expect of that player and that fit and where is this going to go? So, Kyle, the best way I can explain this type of report, because it's not always the case that I would or anyone would report something that is kind of percolating like this. Sometimes it becomes a thing where you're waiting to hear definitively what's going to happen to report that versus reporting that these conversations are happening internally. But to be totally honest, when enough people tell you the same thing who know or are close enough to the situation, to me, there are various roads that this type of conversation could go to. But to me, it's only fair to present you with my knowledge and understanding of what's happening behind the scenes to illustrate where things could go and what doors could close and open for the team as far as options, as far as needs, and even as far as the player goes with a guy like Bobby Okereke, who could obviously help other teams if he was not a Giant, right? So that's another thing. Now, sometimes a player's name being out there, like Bobby's is now, causes another team to pick up the phone, right? We were talking earlier about, hey, if the Cardinals aren't shopping Kyler Murray, but if Kyler Murray's name hits somebody's ear in a front office in the NFL on a quarterback needy team, do they maybe pick up the phone and wonder? And then maybe does that wonder turn into a real conversation? That's another thing that can happen when a player like Bobby, if there's some people who are saying, what can we do here? I don't view him as the ideal fit. Sometimes a name like that bubbles to the surface to see, hey, are there other options here? So, this could go various different ways. I obviously, as I've explained, have seen Bobby play high level football for the Giants. And also the defense is always under, duress in recent years of having to feel like it has to prop up the entire team because the offense isn't scoring. But, like I would say the defense last year, they did pretty well on like third downs and red zone. But overall, the usage, the deployment, and the production of some key pieces really fell off. Obviously, the run defense continued to be a major issue, but Bobby under Wink Martindale had helped that. It still wasn't like top of league run defense, but it helped that. But last year, really saw a regression there up front and tackling in general. So a lot of questions, obviously, about the Giants. I personally, Kyle, am, you can't be in the business as an organization of getting rid of good players. The Giants, unfortunately, in recent years have their, the interesting thing about how the Giants have operated the last few years is all of these player situations, Julian Love, Leonard Williams, Saquon Barkley, Xavier McKinney, right? Daniel Jones, even down to guys like Nick Gates, Feliciano, et cetera. Like all these free agents who come and go, signings they decide against or for. They all have been, thought out, researched. These conversations are happening behind the scenes and extensively. I do think, though, it's almost like you can't lose the forest for the trees, where if you're talking about governing philosophies of, I don't believe in paying a running back, or I don't believe in paying a safety, or linebackers fall in this category, or here's how I want to build a team. And if this player doesn't fall into that situation because of his age or his salary, now I have to move. The Giants, I think, over the course of this have had a thought process to all of their decisions for sure, and a governing philosophy about a lot of them. But I think they've lost their way in not being able to pull all the way back and say, well, wait a minute, are we getting rid of a really good player? Right? So that, I think, when you have the conversations about a guy like Bobby internally, you definitely imagine that there are voices who are saying some version of that. Like guys, how many former captains or players who have produced, who we know would go and probably help someone else significantly, are we going to let walk out the door or voluntarily send out the door? So, put you in a tricky place. So that, Kyle, I hope that answers your question. I'll talk more about it. That's the full context of it. Vince says Rodgers and Devontae Adams, a significantly reduced rate would be a bad idea. Yeah, I've written this too. Like, I don't think so. I reported at the combine that Rodgers preferred the Rams when Stafford had a chance to get out of LA, and that he would bring a Devontae Adams with him, anticipating that he was going to be released from the Jets. I don't necessarily think it's a slam dunk, though, that the same thing would happen to the Giants. In fact, I don't think it would. Now, I don't know that for sure, but I'm looking at the actual facts when it comes to these players. Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams obviously have a great connection. Rodgers, brought him to the Jets from the Raiders, but Adams is at a different point of his career. And I think now, listen, if Aaron Rodgers really believes the Giants would be good next year, like really good, and he could convince Devontae Adams of that, anything's possible, right? But to me, there was the Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams going to the Rams there were two factors there. West Coast, good team, right? And also playing together was, I guess, the third, you could say. So going to the Giants, if you're Devontae Adams, you're removing two of those factors. So Aaron Rodgers, does he have one more year to play? He has this mansion that he bought and added to here in New Jersey. He has houses elsewhere, obviously, but is he a year away from retirement? Probably wouldn't be the worst thing for him privately to, stay in New York and play well for the Giants and then show the Jets what they were missing by kind of bailing on him here when they didn't have to. So obviously he did his part for that to occur, but just saying, there are different factors involved between Rodgers' decision and Adams' decision is the way I view it. So I don't necessarily think that's like a package, that's if I were to predict today what would happen there, I would say if Rodgers was a Giant, I would guess Adams is not. And listen, you think about the way that free agency looks at the wide receiver position right now, right? Like Devontae Adams should have his pick you would think, of several prime suitors who want him to play for a team that can go deep in the playoffs. You would think, how long is that list? But like the Chargers, obviously I mentioned them for a team like Slayton. That would make sense as a team that would chase a guy like Devontae Adams. We talked about the Rams already. So, that's the way I view that. But again, these are my thoughts, and it's from information to informed speculation on these different factors and timelines and player situations. NFL Giant says, I understand the state that Joe and Daboll are currently in, but what is the owner, John Mara, saying about all this? Because at this point, there's no more trips at the beach with your family. It's a funny way of saying that. NFL Giants, good question. I mean, John Mara has been quiet publicly. Joe Schoen made it a point to say that John was in Indianapolis at the start of the week. Shane and Daboll love to explain that they just had lunch or breakfast or dinner with John. It's like their go-to line. So glad to know they have a lot of meals together. It does not mean that they're seeing eye to eye on things. But it's a good talking point. But I did think that was instructive in, it was like Shane's way of saying, and what he was saying was, John's aware of what we're doing. We're keeping him apprised. We're not doing something he's not on board with. He understands. Here's our first preference. Here's our second pivot. Here's the third. Here's option D, right? Like John is involved in those conversations. My insight on Mara would be more of just a thought. This is not anything he has said or done or like definitive report, but it would be surprising to me for John Mara's Giants to sign Aaron Rodgers. I think if they did, it would reflect a level of desperation like that is unprecedented when it comes to the Giants. I don't think that the off-field element that Rodgers brings is anything that the traditional John Mara would invite. I think that winning is important. Having a better quarterback room is essential. Having a product on the field is imperative. Being able to compete. Is Aaron Rodgers the solution, the best solution to that? You can make an argument for some elements of it. But I think it would be surprising from a standpoint of Rodgers and everything that he has either stood for or been involved in, or the controversies or distractions um, or drama, whatever you want to call it, that has surrounded him in the last few years, it would be a very unusual John Mara pivot to welcome that to the Giants. But that said, Mara's announcement that Joe Shane and Daboll were coming back and that he still believed in them, while then acknowledging basically that everything was not good enough. The roster wasn't much better, if any. The play calling needs to be given up. He wants the coach to change several things. The one thing he said he thought was good was the process of drafting, but obviously not much to say about the drafts other than he thinks that they had a good rookie draft, which of course in my mind is debatable. But my point is, the way John Mara behaved and the decision he reached coming off of this past season, where he essentially didn't fire them because they beat the Colts in week 17, or at least didn't fire the coach in week 17 at least didn't fire the coach because he won one of his last 11 or 12 games. Like, I'm done saying that anything's off the table when it comes to John and the Giants, because frankly, I just don't know like what the standard is anymore. I think they're at a point now where they're beyond desperate. And I think that I don't think it's unfair to say a Rodgers signing would both make sense in some ways, but also simultaneously reflect a level of desperation from the Giants and from Mara on down that we have arguably never seen. Like at least in my time. Dan says, Pat, you're the GOAT. Appreciate you, Dan. Do you expect us to make a corner splash early Monday? Ward, Murphy, Reed, as we have to be aggressive and can't miss out. Yes, because the Giants don't just have a number one corner. They might not even have a number two. Like, in other words, how is Banks going to respond? Is he going to bounce back? Is Cordell Flott going to take another step? Or maybe he is who he is. And is he going to be able to stay healthy, right? Drew Phillips, a developing young slot corner, right? Are you going to play him, rotate him more into the outside as well? Or, is there a ceiling there? So like they need to attack that position. Dan says, prediction on how much cap we will create with restructures. Yeah, good question. I think that'll just be as needed. So Dan, I think the Giants don't want to be in the business of just continuing to kick the can down the road, especially because I think you could agree with me. They want to put a more competitive product on the field this year, and it sounds like they're under the gun to do so, but you don't want to rip up and compromise the next couple years just to have a 6 or 7 win team this year and then put yourself in the same exact position they did coming out of the 2021 season, Judge Gettleman final year, where they, paid out big money, kicked the can down the road on some of these contracts, restructures, big money to guys like Kenny Golladay, et cetera. And they ended up in cap hell, right? Which then Joe Shane used as a crutch and a complaint for how long it was going to take him to do his stuff. Now you just put yourself into the next GM having the same excuse and the same need for a longer runway. Relic, what's up? Should the Colts sign Darnold, says Young Native. Great backup or QB1. One name I would say to watch for the Colts could be Daniel Jones. I don't hate Darnold for them as well. I do think they're talking about a competition with Anthony Richardson. To me, would not shock me if that competition became a sign of a guy to flat out enter right on top of him as the QB1 on the depth chart. But Darnold, I think, definitely has a lot of options. I know has a lot of options. At this moment, don't see him being the Giants guy. A return to the Vikings is not out of the question, especially considering where is JJ McCarthy health-wise? The surgeries, We saw him standing on the sideline looking like he had lost a ton of weight there at the end of the year after not playing and kind of recovering off to the side. How can Minnesota assure or ensure that it's strong at the quarterback position? They like JJ a lot, but can they let Darnold go, sign a stopgap veteran, and just count on McCarthy just completely taking off, being healthy? That's a question right now that we'll be able to learn some of the answers to that based on how they proceed with Darnold. But yeah, Darnold, Colts, Raiders, stay with Vikings. He has a lot of options there. The fact that the Raiders obviously are continuing to poke around on the trade market as well is an interesting idea. I do think, I think Darnold, his pairing with Kevin O'Connell clearly was unlocked the best football out of him, even though they had a bad couple games at the end there, to put it lightly. I do think that was clearly a good fit for him. Dan says, how does the Titans free agency plan impact chances of moving up to 1? Does signing Darnold, for example, kill their leverage? I'm glad you brought that up because that is another team to consider for Darnold. Yeah, Dan, I would think that, my opinion, if they were to sign Darnold for significant money, like a market level contract for the current top free agent quarterback on the market, then I would expect them to trade out of that spot, especially because, like I said, I think you should be prepared for the Titans to trade out. Right now, I would be surprised if they didn't, based on what they have said and what people around the league think they're going to do. Now, that could change. They could end up just taking a quarterback there. But yes, Dan, to your point, investing a major contract in a veteran like Darnold, I think, in my opinion, would point to them maybe being close to making a move with that draft pick. Young Native says, Browns played well with Flacco. They should sign Rodgers. FBA guy says, go get Kyler Murray. Bombo says, after the study clause thing from Kyler's contract, I don't know if I would trust him to learn Dable's offense. It's fair. Jake Scott says, Giants should sign Gardner Minshew, Danny Dimes, Matt Ryan, Marcus Mariota, Drew Lock, and Tommy DeVito, and have a baseball bullpen. As soon as one messes up, throw in another. That's Jake's got jokes and ideas. Antonio, what's going on? What of our own free agents, Giants-wise, he's talking about, do you see re-signing? I would say, well, we know Casey Kreider already did. Tommy DeVito, exclusive right free agents. I saw Dan Duggan say that Tamon Fox is back. I mean, that's I like Tamon a lot, but they haven't shown a lot of confidence in him over the years, so he's that's not like a needle moving thing. I think that the one that seems to me like an obvious re-signing, and I'm surprised it hasn't happened already, but is Amir Smith-Marset. He is due to be an unrestricted free agent, and ISM was obviously a tremendous addition to them as far as, hey, look at a jolt of life here from a return man, and also like kind of a spark plug in the locker room behind the scenes, good personality, fun guy to be around type thing. Now, he might have created a really good market for himself where we haven't heard about a re-signing or anything yet, because he might actually be, testing to see what's out there. And then, perhaps as a guy who the Giants, were really mostly using as a returner, is this a guy that, ends up getting more money and the Giants aren't going to pay for necessarily when it comes down to free agency, and they'll find another way to fix that? Maybe, but that seems to me like a logical re-signing. A player who found a place that gave him the chance to play more than he had been, to be the regular return man, and a guy who made some plays with the ball in his hands as a returner. So Smith-Marset is an obvious one to me. I don't see why you wouldn't get that done. Would surprise me if Jason Pinnock was back. I guess we'll have to see what his market is, though. A player who, like, if, coming off a season where it's not like it was a great season back there. So you can always have a guy like that who just ends up staying because he's not seeing a better market and the team likes him as a person. And feels like they can get something out of him, whether it's special teams and or defense. But did not strike me as a guy at the end of the year who I was expecting to be gunning to stay in New York. So that's where I stand with that. Aziz, wouldn't expect him back. I think he'll have a market there in a healthy range. I mean, I would bring back Jamie Gillen as a punter. Like I said, I don't think Slayton will be back. So those are some names to consider. How many players do I expect the Giants to sign on day one of free agency? That's a good question, Antonio, because sometimes you make some smaller signings in addition to the big splashes on that first day because you've just found a good fit. A lot of times you wait, though, on some of those guys who it's like, hey, let's reconnect later after we get the big fish done. I mean, I think very clearly between Monday when the tampering period opens and or legal tampering period opens and the Wednesday with the start of the new league year, like I think through those days you can expect, like right now is Friday. By next Friday, we will know what the Giants' direction on the veteran quarterback is. It'd be honestly, it would shock me if it took until Tuesday for us to figure it out, as far as where things were headed and what was looking more likely. Like as I sit here right now, I know Aaron Rodgers' name has been percolating, and I guess obviously it could happen. I still feel like a Russell Wilson is a more likely result, but the Rodgers' name has not been connected to any other team as of yet right now in a strong way. Doesn't appear like there's a strong market forming there. And with the Rams off the board, all anyone's talking about right now with Rodgers is the Giants. Like I said, I think that would be a huge change when it comes to what the Giants, how I would have expected them to operate with Rodgers available, but it would reflect their desperation, I think. So to answer your question, I don't know, corner, guard, quarterback, would be the baseline. They definitely need an extra running back as well. Tommy, health and wealth to you as well, says, hope they take Abdul Carter or Graham and then Grant or Aseri or Jackson in the first 2 rounds. So Tommy wants them to go O-line and D-line in the first couple rounds. Don't hate it at all. Searing thinks Carter will be the pick at 3 and they will sign Rodgers, and he wants defensive tackle in the second round. So I just said Searing's name and my phone's Siri started activating and listening to me. So that was an interesting exercise right there. Welvin, no news yet. I mean, Jonathan Allen just happened. No news yet on that. Like I said, I think that profiles to me as a player who would be looking for a winner and have a market there, like a winning team. But that's a market the Giants are in, the defensive tackle market. Huge, underrated mistake of the Giants last year was not attacking the interior or prioritizing their defensive line in addition to Dexter Lawrence. Similar to the offensive line where they relied on, let's say, Josh Azudu as their swing tackle, their decision to stay with what they had, feeling like Chapman, who was a promising undrafted rookie, was just going to like fill a gap and that they wouldn't need to make more investments on the interior there. I think they clearly understand their mistake there and they need to throw bodies at that. Anthony says, I'm a diehard Giants fan my whole life, and I love your show. I'm sorry, I just don't see them drafting a black QB to be the face of their franchise. I think they will sign a vet and get someone in the second or third round. Anthony, your comment is totally fair based on the precedent of the organization and the fact that it took them so long to start a black quarterback in a game, Geno Smith, and for a black quarterback to win a game for them, Tyrod Taylor. They have drafted a black quarterback before, but your point is well taken as far as what their ridiculous, not ridiculous, what their, sorry, I saw the word ridiculous on screen and it, it's like one of those right to my lips from my subconscious. Their precedent has dictated, that your skepticism is warranted. Now, what I will say though, is that, go back to last year where the Giants were evaluating quarterbacks and looking at Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, JJ McCarthy, Bo Nix, right? They liked both Jaden Daniels and Drake May, black quarterback, white quarterback. They skipped over and did not draft Bo Nix, JJ McCarthy, Michael Penix Jr., 2 white quarterbacks, 1 black quarterback. The way that the Giants are evaluating these players right now is not a race-related issue. It is not unfair, though, for you to suggest that that is a factor in this market and that you have seen in the recent past that is a factor. Let's be honest. The fact that Geno Smith was the one who started in place of Eli Manning, the outrage that emerged from that situation and that controversy. I mean, I'm not going to say anything else, but just bottom line is, yes, it would be a landmark decision for them to draft a black franchise quarterback. It is not a subject that is untouchable, and it is not unfair for you to ask that question or say you would be skeptical. But I'm here to tell you that all the people I know who are making decisions for the Giants and having those conversations, like, these are people who are evaluating the person and the talents and abilities and their qualities as a franchise QB and as a teammate and as a leader, independent of that element. But yeah, like we said, they loved Jaden Daniels last year. Let's see. Anthony, to your question, just to clarify, yes. So they've started Geno Smith and Tyrod Taylor, 2 black quarterbacks in games. Geno Smith was the first black QB to start a game for the Giants when he replaced Eli Manning. And then Tyrod Taylor, 2 years ago, was the first black quarterback to win a game as a starter. Jimmy says, is there anything to the report on Aaron Rodgers, and what are names that you're hearing for the Giants to keep a close eye on? Jimmy, I don't know what report exactly you're referring to specifically, but I think you're talking about just the conversation that, that we're seeing on all these national networks about here's why Rodgers to the Giants makes a lot of sense, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of noise about it, so it could happen. It'll at least make the Giants, covering the Giants, more interesting in 2025. I would say that, but it is veering hard off course from where the Giants would have been in a decision like this in the past if they do so. Let's see. George says Titans just released Harold Landry. Carter is going to the Titans. So that's George saying that he thinks after they released Landry that Abdul Carter, Penn State edge rusher, will be the pick to the Titans. Let's see. Tommy, yep, totally agree with stacking the lines of scrimmage. Anthony wants them to take Ward or Sanders. Tommy says if they take Sanders, his dad will definitely be the next head coach. Yeah, who knows if Deion would be the next head coach if they took Shedeur. What I just brought up several weeks ago, though, is that Deion Sanders would be drafted Shedeur and Dable did not retain his job or succeed well enough to retain his job. That, if he were fired, Deion would absolutely be a name thrown into it. All right, let's see what else we got here. Let's see. The Harold Landry release more means that, like similar to the Jonathan Allen, it's like, okay, these players get dangled. People hear they're available via trade. And if the team can't get anything for a trade, then the release happens. Danny Dudd says Daniel Jones is available. We know Mara loves him. NYC says Rodgers is toxic and Dart is at best a prospect. Paul says happy birthday from Newtown. Paul, good to hear from you, man. Thank you so much. Jordan said you didn't know how many shots you took. No, nothing like that. Just good company. Let's see. Tommy says they should have hired Saleh for defensive coordinator. Searing says Bobby Okereke suffered the D coordinator's scheme. Tommy says, I pray that Rodgers doesn't end up on the Giants. No O-line, and he isn't mobile at all. Anthony would like Abdul Carter if he slipped to the Giants. Okay, let's see. Tommy wants them to build the team for when Archie gets ready. Anthony, thanks for all your contributions here. Really appreciate you and all of you. When Aziz is healthy, he's not bad at all, but it is what it is. Right. I just think he's going to get paid more than the Giants are going to be willing to invest there, but we'll see how the market develops. Steven says, I don't get Aaron Rodgers. We saw how it worked for Jets. Many think they have got more talent than G-Men and it will be different for us. Steven, I personally don't understand it either. I think the only explanation, I would say I don't understand it from a standpoint of why they think it would work. I see it from the standpoint of desperation to have somebody that the Giants consider an NFL starting quarterback on the roster before they enter the draft. But I agree with you. It's, him becoming it almost feels like something that the head coach would love, but that the rest of the organization might be talked into. I'm not reporting that. I'm saying that's what it feels like, All right, a couple more questions and we're getting out of here. Thank you so much for this live chat. For all of you for being here. I really appreciate all the support, all the questions, and all of the conversation. All right. What do you think of Brady Cook, says Har Fanatic Lance? Throw him into that category of quarterbacks who I think if out of Missouri, if the Giants are looking at adding or addressing the QB position, not in the first round. McCord from Syracuse actually is a kid who interests me more so, but there's definitely a good amount of QBs that you could argue along with a guy like Cook or like developmental players. But I'm a Kyle McCord guy, I think, especially after the combine. Steven says, off topic, do you think with Saquon Barkley, was it at some point his camp thought, listen, if we hold pat, we can get out of here, get paid, and get on a team where I flourish? If so, do you think it happened? I think it was one of those deals, Steven, where he had a firm belief / understanding of what his market would be if he got to the market. And having not gotten there the prior year, it was a standpoint of, I want to stay in New York, but I feel like I know that I have a larger market out there and a better market out there. And staying one more year with the Giants on the tag and having the football continue to be underwhelming to bad and having his value kind of suppressed by the way that the Giants treated and talked about him led eventually to both sides understanding that it wasn't moving in the direction of him staying. And so at that point, it became, let's find a greener pasture and not just more money, right? Jake says, I like Dart until I heard he said he thinks Joe Judge is going to be a great NFL coach one day. Joe Judge was quoted saying punting wins games. Listen, you're not going to find Joe Judge hate here, Jake. I think Joe Judge there were definitely elements of his coaching style that I'm sure he learned from and that he would do differently if he did it again. But I thought Joe Judge was a really good CEO coach and a good coach for this market and fan base and team. And I think he was giving the Giants a lot of what they asked him to give them when they hired him, as far as creating a culture, instilling a work ethic, getting things back to the way that the Giants used to do it, embracing their history, bringing former players back, and on and on and on. I think what Jackson did just there is he supported and stuck up for somebody who he knows is a good person and a good coach. And I was happy that he did that because sometimes it feels like you're yelling into a well when you're somebody like me saying like this coach or this player who a lot of people disagree with has really good qualities that people should identify. So I actually agree with Dart. And, I think Judge is going to continue to prove people that he's, the kind of coach that people used to think he was, as he continues to get more responsibilities and do more work with a good roster and coaching staff down there at Ole Miss. So that's my opinion. Obviously, you could find different opinions in other places. But yeah, I agreed with Jackson there. I actually thought that showed you he gravitates to, like, he really valued, hey, this guy's won Super Bowls. What can I learn from him, right? An NFL head coach who's now down here who can tell me what's, hey, here's what I went through. Here's what went right. Here's what went wrong, right? Like, I think he recognized the value of that. Tommy says, do you see a scenario where Dable and Joe stay at their respective positions after this season? What will it take for that to happen? And have you heard about key free agents that they really consider bringing in to play a role in the development of the team? Tommy, it would not shock me if Joe Schoen was the GM in 2026. It would surprise me if Brian Dable was the coach in 2026. So it's possible this is both of their last seasons. Based on how John Mara talked about them, it feels like Dable's under more pressure than Schoen, even though they're both under pressure. I don't know what the win number is. I definitely think if you add a quarterback that looks promising and is developing promisingly, obviously you're grading on a curve then about wins and losses probably internally versus, hey, 5 and 6 wins is horrendous. But if it's 6 wins and we started a rookie quarterback all year who looks really good, that's different, right? Like, people are giving a longer leash to Drake May coming off of a, up and down rookie season, a rough rookie season as far as the team. The head coach got fired. May basically got pulled out of the game in the Pro Bowl. I mean, in the Pro Bowl games with no pads, basically got benched in the second half of that game. So, I think, but you give a longer leash and you give some rope to guys who have good qualities, good traits that players talk highly about, that the locker room likes, all those things, Key free agents, we went over that a little bit earlier, Tommy, but, I would say one of the top corners, like DJ Reed, makes a lot of sense. Murphy's a guy I know that they've checked in on and spent some time talking, or, a significant time talking about, right guard, defensive tackle, wide receiver 2, but it starts at quarterback. They need a running back too, obviously. Bookend says Judge lost the job when he started defending himself in the media. Should have just said nothing. Yeah, for sure. Did not. Right. Dug a deeper hole there. Definitely one of the things he probably learned at the end. Horror Fanatic says Brady Cook broke all kinds of records at the combine. I'm high on him and he might go as a UDFA. Hey man, you never know. You never know. Tommy says, are they bringing a new defensive coordinator? If you know anything there. Haven't heard that. Would be very interesting if Brian Dable was receiving the freedom to hire another defensive coordinator. That would be interesting. I will say this, the tackling was more fundamentally sound with that staff, says Bookend Tackles. Yeah, for sure. Tackling was much better prior to last year. Tommy, here's what I would say about the new defensive coordinator thing. Yes, we've talked about Bobby Okereke. We've talked about, Banks and Okereke sliding and that kind of thing. Let's end on this. The Giants' continual finger pointing towards the defense, whether it's their firing of the Wilkins brothers and the scapegoating of them, and then Martindale resigning because the worst offense in the league is scapegoating guys on the defense. Now it's, Jerome Henderson, Mike Trier's turn. And, Bobby Okereke is not a good fit. Now we have people talking about, are they going to hire a new DC, or, people like you asking about, is some big change coming to the defense? It is so outrageous that John Mara, from him on down, like when John Mara said after the season that he's tired of seeing teams go up and down the field on his defense, what a absolute, like, honestly, an underplayed, ludicrous evaluation of their team, considering where their offense is, how bad they are on offense, how poorly their games are managed offensively, how much pressure is put on the defense. Now, this goes to Martindale. This goes to Bowen. This goes to, if you had a new defensive coordinator tomorrow, this is not about the defense. Yes, the defense needs to get better. Yes, they need more personnel on defense. And for sure, Joe Schoen and the Giants management and ownership stands to have to answer to that. But my Lord, to talk about the Giants' problems being something that needs to be solved on the defensive side of the ball is really more reinforcement of how lost they actually are. Vince says it's a good sign. A lot of coordinators don't want to work with Dable. I mean, talk about guys leaving the team left and right year after year. Tommy also likes Tyler Shaw from Louisville. Would love to see us get him after some good picks in the first and second round. Guys, this was an awesome Talking Ball Lunchtime Live with Pat Leonard. Reminder brought to you by MyBookie at mybookie.ag, the most props and player bets you can find anywhere. Go to mybookie.ag. Pat's Picks is the promo code, 50% match on your first deposit up to $2,000. If you want to win big, you're going to MyBookie. You're also going to want to start feeling the difference today at boomchaga.com right here behind me. The code is TalkinBall25. The QR code is here. Your first order on the subscribe and save option is going to be 25% off if you use the code or the QR code. It is so Boom Chaga Mushroom Super Drink is a natural extract loaded with anti-inflammatory, immune-boosting antioxidants and heart-healthy compounds. You can pour it in your favorite drink. I put mine in my coffee every morning and immediately feel the difference. I personally feel a post-workout-like energy boost with Boom. You can also, take some midday, throw it in a coffee or in a glass of water or tea midday. Chaga also has the ability to reduce inflammation and improve immune health with its beta-glucans and antioxidants, lower cholesterol. So go get boomchaga.com. Start feeling the difference today. Use that code. Also brought to you by Soloretta for Men, luxury menswear and tailoring in Midland Park, New Jersey, and Estate 98 Coffee. Estate98.com/Talkin Ball for 80% off. Please go support our sponsors. They are the reason why we're able to do this. I really appreciate them. Kenneth says Shane and Dable are a disaster. And Tommy says, hold it down, Pat. Great to see the channel grow. Until next time, cross your fingers. One day, your takes will be with great news when the team gets back to giant football. Smash mouth football. From your lips to Joe Shane's ears. Vince says, thanks, Pat. Thank you, Vince, Tommy, and everybody, especially the super chatters, Relic and Elias, putting their money where their mouth is when it comes to Talking Ball with Pat Leonard. If you missed the beginning of our episode, I floated out an idea of Kyler Murray as somebody that teams with a quarterback maybe should think to call Arizona and gauge interest there. Who knows if that's going to come to pass, but obviously Aaron Rodgers is the name that everybody is watching and waiting on now. We will see if that happens. You will have to stay right here on Talking Ball with Pat Leonard on the YouTube channel, PL and NFL, as well as Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Threads, and on X or Twitter. It's P Leonard NYDN. Everywhere else, I'm PL on NFL. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. We will see you next time on Talkin' Ball.